Hello and welcome to the Growth Project. This is Milt Lowder, joined today with Marlee Johnson.
Hello.
Hey, a doctoral student intern at AMPLOS and studying IO psychology. This is your second podcast, am I correct?
Second podcast.
Yeah, so excited about our conversation today. Before we get started, just to remind you if you're new to our podcast, or remind you if you're not new, but if you are new, what AMPLOS is. We are a performance psychology practice located in Greenville, South Carolina. We exist to help people be better and pursue better. And we do that in a lot of different arenas, a lot of different avenues, a lot of different opportunities of engaging with leaders, with coaches, with organizations, with sports teams who have an interest in pursuing better and being better. We try to optimize who people are and what they do in every aspect of their life. And the Growth Project is our podcast. We are nearing our 300th episode. And we created this to be relevant in your life, to hopefully encourage you, to motivate you, to inspire you, to help you learn, and to help you do. And so that's the spirit of why this podcast exists. We are thankful for your listening, for your comments, for your encouragement. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and give us your feedback as ways that we can practice what we preach and try to help us get better as well. So Marlee, today's topic, really excited about. I am completely biased towards it. It's one looking through the catalog that it doesn't seem we've done in a long time. And today's topic is self-talk.
Yep.
And, being a cognitive behavioral psychologist, really understanding what self-talk is and what it means. But before we kind of get too far down that path, just curious for you, when you hear the word self-talk, what comes to mind?
Yeah, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier. So you have the clinical cognitive behavioral background. I'm more on the IO, industrial organizational side of psychology. So this is a topic that we don't necessarily talk about too much in classes. It definitely comes into play. But as a former athlete, I feel like whenever I think about self-talk, I think about my time playing volleyball and how that, how what you think and what you say to yourself really impacts how you perform, who you are, who you become. And what I learned, on the volleyball court really is translated to the rest of my life, in grad school, at work, in my life. So excited to be talking about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. A principle that we try to believe is, and I just get confirmed over and over again, that the mental skills that make you successful in sports, make you successful in school, make you successful in business, make you successful in life. And so I love that's how it's playing out for you. And I think a great benefit of our profession is as you grow personally, you grow professionally. As you grow professionally, you grow personally.
Absolutely.
And trying to bring that aspect. And so, before we dive into the definition of self-talk, I would encourage all of our listeners to do what you just did. Like that first thought about self-talk, how can it relate to your life? When you think about self-talk, what comes to mind for you? And as we go through this podcast, tying it back to you, what does this mean? What does it mean to you? And how can you put these principles into practice to help you think better, which helps you be better, which helps you pursue better?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So our definition of self-talk, how might we define that?
So from what I've learned here really is that they're those inner dialogue conversations we have with ourselves, the things that we tell ourselves throughout the day. But I kind of want to turn the question back around on you and hear from the expert. What is self-talk and why does it matter?
Yeah, so the self-talk, when I hear expert, I'm thinking, well, who is that? So that own internal dialogue, is she talking about me and the pressure that comes from that? So self-talk is exactly what you just said. It's a quiet or sometimes not so quiet conversations we have with our mind. And there's a proverb that says, as you think, so you are. So self-talk is really how do you express those thoughts to yourself? And how do those thoughts govern or influence how you feel, how you respond, the decisions that you make, the actions that you put forth? And what self-talk is really trying to become aware of, hey, when are our thoughts working for us? And when are our thoughts working against us? And it's very foundational to our well-being. It's very foundational to our ability to process and handle the events and circumstances and people that we are constantly interacting with.
Right. Yeah. And like you said earlier, it's our thoughts that drive everything else. So
Yes.
having the choice to change a thought is so important to the rest of what we do.
Yeah. And I think that's, we'll talk about this self-talk about permission to be human. And giving yourself permission to be human means giving yourself permission to experience the negative thoughts, to have a negative reaction, and have the courage to handle the emotions associated with those negative thoughts.
Right.
But that permission to be human means I do get to choose a different thought, which leads to a different response.
Right. Yeah. And it seems, I know with self-talk, a lot of us, myself included, deal with those negative thoughts coming in. So there's a stat that kind of struck me of we process 50 to 70,000 thoughts every day, but 70% of them are around there are negative. Can you speak a little bit to why that might be?
Yeah, and so that is an amazing statistic that we have 50, 70,000 thoughts a day, and predominantly those thoughts are negative. And where that is just basically how our brains were created. Our autonomic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system was created to protect us from threats. So early on, primitive man and woman, they were in constant life or death situations. And so the brain was created to protect them from those threats. And so how it was taught to me is in my physiological psychology class, the caveman walks out the cave and he sees a saber-toothed tiger right in front of him. And if he has to stop and think, oh, I wonder what to do, he's dead. So immediately his brain perceives a threat. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Cortisol sends a signal to your adrenal glands. Adrenaline floods the body and activates everything you need to survive and deactivates everything you don't. And so what I want our listeners to think about is that fight or flight response. And the best way to describe it in the heat of the moment is as you're driving the car and you run off the road and you jerk back on the road. That huge wave of adrenaline going through your body that is activated when you're under a life or death situation. Well, that cortisol signal to your adrenal glands, when that adrenaline floods the body, it activates your liver to secrete glucose because you need more energy if you're going to fight or flee. You need more oxygen, so you start sucking air. And usually we breathe the wrong way. We need to get rid of that excess energy, so we sweat. Your face will flush, turn red. You need more blood flow, so your heart will really start beating because you're trying to generate all that energy to handle the task or address the threat in the moment. Well, what do you not need to do? Well, you don't need to go to the bathroom, so your bowels and urinary tract system shut down. You don't need to eat. Your digestive system shuts down. That's where butterflies come from. But what's, in terms of self-talk, what happens is your brain becomes very focused on the threat. And we talk about stress making you selfish, and stress creates separation. That stress makes you really focus on the threat that's in front of you. And so back to my caveman story, if he's not worried about the saber-toothed tiger that's 150 yards away, he's got to deal with them front and center. And so that negative thought is triggered by the negative lens with which how we see in the situation. And our brains have not evolved a whole lot.
Right. Yeah, because I'm not coming face to face with a saber-toothed tiger too often.
No, I haven't seen one in quite some time. But our brain has a really difficult time distinguishing between a real event or a real threat and a perceived event or a perceived threat.
Right.
And since it's not life or death, our body still reacts to the thought, I'm in danger, I need energy, I'm in survival mode. And so without being aware of that thought, our body automatically goes, that's what it's called, an autonomic nervous system.
Automatic.
Yes. And so the sympathetic nervous system gets activated to protect us from those threats.
Right. So it's a survival thing.
It's absolutely a survival mechanism. And, we were talking about the 5 primary emotions that we experience, and you reference Inside Out. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Pixar movie.
Yeah. And so some of our research comes from scholarly articles and some comes from Pixar movies. But those 5 emotions are what? Do you remember what they are we were talking about?
I've got it written down. But joy, fear, anger, disgust, sadness, and some people say surprise.
And 4 out of those 5 are negative.
Right.
Negative emotions. And so it speaks back to those dominant emotions that we experience are really controlled and influenced by our thoughts.
Yeah, which are a lot of times more negative, not the happy ones.
Yeah, because those are those 4 primary emotions. And so those negative thoughts, we're becoming aware of those.
Right.
In that process. And so understanding how your brain was created, understanding, and I guess, Marlee, there's one thing I've learned in this field of psychology, is your brain will seek to develop the most dominant picture you paint with which you attach the strongest emotion. So out of those 5 emotions, 4 are negative. The strongest emotion we experience is fear. So it's so easy for our brains to develop a picture of who we don't want to be, how we don't want to be, what we don't want to do. And so we're constantly painting a picture out of fear,
right?
And we become what we think about.
Yeah, and we had talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but that don't language, you're still thinking about the things that you don't want to do, so you're saying what you don't want to do, and that sometimes can lead you right down that path.
And we aren't even aware of it. And so, I've had some pivotal lessons. A lot of people have heard me speak, have heard me tell the stories about my son at the age of 3. He loved saying holy cow. And everything in his world was holy cow. And for some reason that bothered me. So I sat him down one night and I got his little cheeks. I said, son, don't say holy cow, say unbelievable. He's like, okay, Dad, I got you. Don't say holy cow, say unbelievable. So I go to work early the next day and I come home and my wife's kind of smirking at me. And I'm like, okay, what happened? And she said, we were outside in the yard and the airplane came over real low. And Jay looked up and said, don't say holy cow, say unbelievable. and so that was one of the first lessons that I really started paying attention. The brain has a hard time hearing the word don't.
Right.
We see it oftentimes in sports.
Yeah. Yeah.
We at every level. Don't jump off sides. Don't make a mistake. Yeah, don't make a mistake. Don't hit the ball out in volleyball. Don't walk this guy. Don't, whatever it is. And we see it oftentimes in corporate settings. We see it oftentimes at home. Don't get mad. Don't get upset. Don't get frustrated. Don't say the wrong thing. And you're constantly painting a picture of who you don't want to be and what you don't want to do.
Right. And our brains just don't do a very good job of picking up on the negative side of that either. They hear don't, but then what they really hear is get mad. So then what do? You get mad because that was the language that you used.
When I tell myself don't do something, I'm really invoking anxiety, and all fear is the most extreme form of anxiety.
Right.
And so that's kind of the underpinnings of how our brains were created. Now, it's also important to notice adrenaline is a very powerful and neat hormone, that it's secreted when we're excited, when we're mad, when we're have a lot of energy, when we're angry. And so part of self-talk is understanding and interpreting my emotions correctly.
Right.
And putting thoughts and language into what am I thinking, what am I experiencing, because it's not as you feel, so you think.
Yeah.
It's as you think, so you feel. As you think, so you are. And most people get that backwards.
Right. So really the game is about capturing your thoughts and figuring out what you're thinking, becoming aware of that.
And how difficult that is to do. We have 50, 70,000 thoughts a day. Think about how many you are having a minute or how many thoughts you're having a second. And your brain is very lazy and very efficient. So in our process of raising awareness around a person's self-talk and their inner dialogue, it takes a lot of work because the brain sometimes doesn't process, a lot of times doesn't process the thought consciously. Right. It's just reacting. And so people will oftentimes say things like, well, I feel, or I felt, and they aren't even aware of the thought that precedes that.
Right. Yeah, and that's just a lot of thoughts a day to process, and we can't possibly process them all. So it's figuring out which one, what is the pattern of them, what's the tendency?
Yes.
How do we make them work, more of them work for me?
Yeah, I love that language. How can we get my brain and my thoughts working for me instead of against me?
Right.
So what else around self-talk do we need to understand the background of it? What other...
I think we hit the background pretty good. I guess next question is like, what do we do with all of this information? So
go back to our process of growth: awareness, action, accountability. That's our growth process at AMPLOS, and part of that is, and the purpose of this podcast is to really raise one's awareness of their thought life. What does it sound like when it's positive? What are the events that trigger positive self-talk? Who are the people that trigger positive self-talk? What are the beliefs you have about yourself that influence and govern those 50 to 70,000 thoughts? Conversely, what are the events or situations or people that trigger your negative self-talk?
Yeah.
And what are your primary beliefs about yourself that govern that self-talk?
Right. And just first, because I think this is something I learned at AMPLOS too as well. So for our listeners, can you give some examples of what positive self-talk versus negative self-talk, maybe that neutral self-talk sounds like?
Yeah, so there's 3 different ways to look at self-talk. I think that's a good point of what are the criteria. So the positive self-talk, I like to think in terms of I can, I am, I will.
Okay, yeah.
Like, here's what I can do. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's who I am. Here's what I believe. Very proactive, positive responses to situations. Talking to yourself, I've got this. I can do this. I believe I have what it takes, which is a great predictor of self-efficacy that we've talked a lot about on this self-talk. On our podcast. To me, those are positive self-talk. No matter the situation, no matter the event, this positive outlook on who I am, on what I'm doing, on other people, that really opens the brain up to experiencing joy, to being happy, to being fulfilled, to being creative, being innovative, being confident, driving peak performance. There's a direct correlation in the positive of your thoughts and the power of your performance.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, negative is quite the opposite. Negative self-talk sets limits on who you are, who you can become, and what you can do. And so the negative self-talk becomes more of, I have to, I need to, I should, I can't.
I don't.
Or don't do this, don't do that. And it sets limits on what we can accomplish. Oftentimes, negative self-talk is disguised in the form of a question. We start asking ourselves, do I have what it takes? Am I happy in this relationship?
Am I really supposed to be here?
Am I supposed to be here?
Expert?
Am I the expert? It's a great point. And we know when you ask that question from a position of weakness, back to our strongest emotions we experience are negative and fearful, your brain interprets that in a negative way. And how I try to teach this, Marlee, have you ever heard a happy person ask, am I happy?
Probably not.
Because they don't have to ask the question, they just are. Their inner self-talk is telling, like, they already know I'm happy, but when you ask a question, it creates doubt.
Right.
Or a prepared person asking, am I prepared? Or a successful person asking, am I successful? They're a byproduct of that internal dialogue, but when they ask that question, the way the brain is wired is looking for threats. And the threat is, well, if I'm asking the question, I must not be.
Right.
And so negative self-talk shows up in a lot of different forms and fashions, but the byproduct of it decreases my confidence, it increases my anxiety, it helps me focus on what I cannot control. I live in constant comparison in relationship to others or how things used to be. Like that I can't leaves you helpless and hopeless.
Right.
It leaves you stuck in the past. That I need to, have to, should leaves you in the future, which is where anxiety comes from.
Right.
So positive self-talk helps you stay in the present moment, which is where performance truly takes place.
Right. And I also think sometimes positive helps you recognize the controllables. What can you control about a situation? And then being able to act within that versus focusing on what you cannot control as well.
And being human means we're going to focus on what we can't control. I would never take away the privilege of being human.
Right.
But back to that, being human means we get to choose where we spend our time and effort and energy, and it's really about how we think. So the neutral self-talk also leads you to stay in the present moment. That I may not choose to be positive in that moment. There may be some evidence to doubt that situation. I have a hard time, hey, I got this, I can do this. You're down, 17-0. In a football game, it's hard to say, or you're down, and it's late in the game. A positive, hey, we got this, we can do this. But the neutral thought takes away some of the emotion, takes away some of the pressure, and says, well, what can I do? What's the next right thing to do? It may be a technical, it may be a one swing thought in golf. It may be something that brings you back to this moment, such as, hey, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Next play mentality, next situation mentality. a little trigger word that keeps you focused on what you're doing. And oftentimes it gets your brain out of the way and gets you busy focused on the things you can control.
Right.
So those are the three types that we really talk about: positive, negative, and if you can't be positive, at least be neutral.
Right. And I think Drew says this a lot of it's really not always about becoming more positive, but having less negative self-talk. So whether that's moving into a neutral or into a positive, however it's working for you.
Yeah, and I think people, I remember working with one of our players a long time ago at Clemson, and he was experiencing some depression, and we really challenged his thoughts. Always and never are two other extreme words.
Yes.
That really suggest, and we usually say those in a negative way. That often sets limits on what we can do, and that's how you know you're kind of living by rules that are governing your life. You got to really look for the evidence to support those rules or beliefs. But this player was really struggling with depression. Two primary symptoms of depression are helpless and hopeless. Thoughts were overwhelmed in terms of, I can't do this anymore. I need to be doing this. I should be thinking better. I shouldn't be feeling this way. A lot of shouldn't on himself in that process.
Right.
And so we worked for probably 3 to 4 months, and he got to feeling better. And I didn't see him after a while, and he came back to see me about a month and a half later, and he had stepped back a little bit. He said, "I'm so mad at you." I'm like, why are you mad at me? He said, "Because you got me to lie to myself." I'm like, okay, how were you lying to yourself? He's like, well, these things I were telling myself, I'm not sure they were true. Like this positive self-talk was making a difference in his life. But as soon as he started feeling overwhelmed again, he doubted the truth. He doubted the positive self-talk, and he thought I had tricked his brain into lying to him. Right. And so some people look at the positive self-talk as they're lying to themselves. Well, that isn't what positive self-talk is. Just being positive, like that's a false sense of optimism. That's promoting a high level of self-esteem. But I made him digest the thoughts and the beliefs we created about himself and say, well, which ones weren't true?
Right.
But the feelings were driving the thoughts and made him question, because that's where he was struggling. So there's the challenge. A lot of people, I'm not a positive person. We aren't talking about this false sense of lying to yourself. We're talking about creating an inner dialogue that gets your brain working for you, that you can believe in that.
Right.
And being less negative means at least I can focus on the technical aspect, the neutral of what can I do. But I would challenge all of our listeners right now, and maybe we can talk a little bit about how to become aware of those situations. When you're negative, the one question I would ask you is, how's it working out for you? How is it helping you in that situation? If you're facing the brutal truth, which we have to do to get better, are you doing that from a position of weakness or a position of strength? And your negative self-talk, how is that helping you be better? How is it helping you pursue better? How is it helping you in your relationships? How is it helping your well-being? Those are the things that it's hard to quit doing what works for us. But misery loves company, and we love sharing the misery with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of times I easily slip into this too of like, well, I'm just being realistic with negative, but you have to challenge yourself to think, is it actually working for me to be negative right now, or is there like a better thought pattern here that I can engage in? I
think Will Smith had this quote, and I loved it. It's like, being realistic is the most commonly traveled road to mediocrity. Like, why would you be realistic? And he tells the story, is it realistic to walk into a room and hit a light switch and the light comes on? He's like, fortunately, Edison didn't think so. Is it realistic to take a big piece of metal and fold it and rivet and weld it together and put an engine on it and think it would fly across the ocean? Fortunately, the Wright brothers didn't think so. But you're right. So many people say, well, I'm just being realistic. Well, again, is realistic helping you push the boundaries of what you can do? And the challenge, the great challenge we have as human beings is accept the limitations of being human without accepting the limits that being human imposes upon us. And I heard Corey say this, so think about this in the matter of self-talk. Being human means my brain is wired to focus on the negative. Being human is my brain is constantly looking out for threats. being human is I'm having 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and 70% of those thoughts will be negative. Well, that's human, right? That's being common. But the most common thing you do is stay there in that negativity, stay there in that mindset. So one way we create separation is to be uncommon in our thought life. So when we've built the Clemson program around the quote from George Washington Carver, you do the common things in life in uncommon ways, you command the attention of the world. Through the lens of self-talk, it's common to have negative thoughts. It's common, but being uncommon means, as you said, being human, I get to choose a different thought.
Right.
I get to choose a different response.
And we get to do that better when we are more aware that that actually happens, that we are human, and that we can be prepared for when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we think about identifying, I know Corey likes to use a traffic light, and other people like to use a traffic light of raising awareness, the red, yellow, green. So the red becomes one of those situations, events, as we talked about earlier, that trigger negative self-talk. Because if I can be prepared for those situations, I have a better chance to call a timeout and keep myself from spiraling. So when we think about the red light for you as our listeners, what are those situations, events, people, places that automatically your brain's responding to in a negative way? So what's a good example? You said you had a good example for us.
So for me, so I played volleyball all through high school and college and had an awesome high school coach who was really good at coaching the mental skills as well. And I'm 5'10", so I'm not short, but I was short against other teams playing volleyball trying to
5'10" seems really tall to me. That's my own self-talk.
I was pretty average sized for the position that I played. And I just remember this one game I just kept getting blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked again. And she finally called a timeout and pulled me aside. She's like, "What are you telling yourself right now?" And I was like, well, I feel like my job as an outside is to keep the ball in play, put the ball down, and not get blocked. But I simply cannot do that right now, and I'm letting my teammates down. And she was like, "Marlee, you have it wrong. Stop thinking like that. You have to know that like the big swings, the big blocks are what make this game fun. So next time you get blocked, look at the girl that blocked you, tell her good block, know that that's what's making it fun, and then in your head be like, let's go. Like this is a fun game." But that red light moment for me was every time I got blocked, my first thought was, oh, my teammates aren't going to trust me anymore.
And back to a positive thought, like it's hard to say, oh, this is awesome. Like this is so much fun. I love getting blocked. I love getting shamed. I love letting my team down. That's not what being positive, but being aware of that and where it goes, because there were a lot of thoughts with that. I feel like I'm letting my team down. This is my job. I can't do my job. And so you start seeing the as you think, so you are. Lack of energy, loss of hope, helpless. There's nothing I can do. It's always going to be like this. I'm too small to play this position. Who am I to be up here?
Never going to play in college.
Never going to play in college.
Be a starter again.
And that negative self-talk really sets limits. And what's interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit later about this ABC models. I can't change that situation of how you were created or how tall you are. I can only change how I think about it.
Right.
So for you as listeners, think about these red light moments for you. What are the situations where you are not probably even aware or conscious or mindful of your thought life? You are just automatically feeling anxious or scared or frustrated or discouraged or depressed or overwhelmed. Let those emotions inform you of what you're thinking. And think about those situations and where is it taking your thought life? And back to what we can and cannot control, can we change the situation or can we change the person? Probably not. We can only change how we think about it. So let's go from red to green and we'll get back to yellow. So green, when do you find yourself that, I think about green lights, I'm really unconscious. I'm really, I'm such in a state of flow, I'm not even really mindful of what I'm thinking. But my brain is in that framework of I can, I am, I will. There's no doubt. There's no hesitation. There's no wasted energy. There's no tension. When you think about a green light moment, what are some ideas that you think about?
Yeah, I mean, going back to volleyball for me, that was serving. That was my reset of I know I can get this 1 by 1 foot ball back in that 30 by 30 foot box, and I can do it every time with consistency. And it was that flow state. But in full transparency, it's a lot harder to think of these green light moments than it is some of the red light moments. And I think that's probably a sign of my own self-talk a little bit.
Well, I think most of us are not aware because I said it's happening at a subconscious level.
Yeah.
You've trained your brain so much for that moment. And we're all maybe experts at something.
Right.
And so you just walk in so much confidence, you aren't even aware of what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what makes it a green light. So it's that reflection and evaluation. Well, when do I find myself completely in the present moment? When is my brain not interfering? When am I having some of that positive self-talk? When are those situations, or more importantly, who am I around?
Yeah, and that's a big one. I think the people you surround yourself with have so much to do with how you view yourself, think about yourself, the thoughts that you're having. How they think about themselves and you too and speak into your life has such a big impact on that.
And think about what you're looking at. What are you comparing yourself to on social media? What are you reading?
Right.
And your brain is constantly, it's not able to capture every thought. We aren't able to do that as human beings. But the brain is constantly cataloging and storing this information. And so these green light moments are more difficult because it's happening almost without our awareness.
Right.
And so then the yellow light obviously is in between. It's like I have the tendency to go one way or the other. And I can, I hit a yellow light. If people know my personality, I'm hitting the gas. Like I'm going right on through. Other people's personality, they see a yellow light, they're going to hit the brakes. But a yellow light for me is what we want you to think about. Those situations or events where I do feel like I have some level of control over my response. And that I can go this way or that way. I'm walking into a meeting, I'm presenting on a topic I really know well, but I don't know the people I'm presenting to.
Right.
And so some positive self-talk is, hey, I know what I'm doing, I have what it takes. The negative, that little bit of doubt, are they wanting to be here? Are they interested in what I have to say? Is this going to really hit home? And we know, we already mentioned, when I ask questions, that creates doubt.
Yeah.
And so the yellow means I can go one way or the other, that I can take it to a green and get in the moment, and maybe that's a positive, maybe that's even where a neutral is needed, or that yellow can spiral out of control and become a full-blown red, where I'm really beating myself up or really thinking negatively about other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. So make sure that I'm hearing you correctly. It's kind of like the yellow lights where you're standing on the edge, and I can either stay in the zone, get into the flow, or we can full-blown lose control.
Yes. Yeah, and so I think about the yellow light. A lot of times I tell the people I work with, how do we call a timeout? How can we call a timeout? And how the mind and body work together. As I quiet my mind, I want to quiet my body. And so the best way to offset that sympathetic nervous system that gets fired from our autonomic nervous system, that is to take that deep inner breath. So I just was demonstrating it. I don't know if people can see that or not, probably not. But that diaphragmatic breath and hold it and let it out. And so then my brain has a chance to take over. That what separates us from the animals is that ability to think, to interpret the situation. Am I in danger? Am I not in danger? What thought? I can't change the situation. I can only change how I think about it. And the brain is more susceptible to imagery and a positive thought in a relaxed state, when the body's in a relaxed state. So the playing free that I talk about, that I teach, stands for focus, relax, engage, and enjoy. The relax is, how do I quiet my mind? What's my self-talk? And how do I quiet my body?
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of we got the red, yellow, green awareness. What are those situations, events, people that bring out my positive self-talk, negative self-talk? When is neutral self-talk really necessary? But back to our growth process, awareness without action only leaves me worse off than I was before. Knowing I need to think differently, knowing I need to be prepared, knowing I need to do something different, and not knowing what to do or how to do it, only increases my level of anxiety and depression and frustration and discouragement. So as we have this awareness, what's something we can do to help us have a better thought life?
Yeah, so one thing that's been really helpful for me for a really long time is this kind of just this recognition that we say things to ourselves that we would never in a million years say to other people, but we don't hear them that way when we're thinking about ourselves. we hear, oh, I'm not good enough, but I would never look at you and be like, you're not good enough. I'd encourage you. So kind of being able to take a step back and look at ourselves from like this third person lens of, is what I'm saying to myself something that I would say to anybody else? And if not, why am I saying that way?
Yeah, it's part of that level of inferiority of we say things to others we would never say to ourselves, we would never say to other people, becomes our belief about ourselves.
Right.
And we aren't able to hear it. With Jay, my son, again, when he was young playing golf, and still playing golf, that negative self-talk is so easy to see and witness in other people.
Yes.
And he's talked about wanting to be a coach. And so I have a reminder that pops up at 9 o'clock on my phone still. I probably put it in there when he was 12 or 13 or 14. It's like, hey, Jay, coach yourself. If you were going to coach somebody else and you heard them react and they had a bad play or they had a bad swing or they had a bad hole or they had a bad tournament, what would you say to them? Because what you said is we would encourage other people.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we tend to think we aren't worthy of that same piece, that we should be our own worst critic.
Right. And that we can beat ourselves up and that it's okay because it's us doing it to ourselves. But that's not, our thoughts are the ones that drive our actions. So it really is within our control. We just need to recognize that. And
so part of this self-worth and this self-value, and I think women tend to be a little bit more internally critical of themselves, even so more so than men. I think research suggests that over the years of socialization, men and women, that's obviously changing in today's world, but especially in terms of raising children, women really tend to beat themselves up, that they can only be as happy as their least happy child. They can only be as successful as their least successful child, where men, we kind of do a better job of maybe separating who we are from what we do in terms of parenting, but less separating who we are from what we do in a corporate space.
That's probably true. I'm not a parent, so
yeah. So this is what old people get to speak to. But I think that's part of that inner dialogue is you're saying things to yourself that I should be doing more. I should be doing this. I shouldn't have done that. And Albert Ellis called that shouldn't on yourself.
Yeah.
And being mindful of how does that thought help. And so when you catch yourself in this third person narrative, saying things to yourself that you would never say to some other people, what's something we can do as we become aware of that? Like, how did you, if we're going to put you on the spot,
yeah,
and your coach helped flip the script,
yeah,
how did you do that?
I think first just recognizing, oh, wow, I do that. Like, I have negative self-talk. And then when I hear it, basically being like, you can't do whatever. Replacing that with like, Marlee can't do whatever. And then thinking, would I really say that to myself if I was not myself?
Yeah.
Like, kind of slowing down and reeling it back and listening to, like, do I sound like a mean person right now? Because I wouldn't want to be mean to anybody else. But then I think also when you get really in your head, it can be hard to do that too. So I think a lot of it comes back to this idea of surrounding yourself with people. And, my best friend, she's somebody I can call up and be like, this is the thoughts that are going on in my head right now. And just even verbalizing them, a lot of times I'm like, yeah, this is not good. Like, help me get out of this, and letting somebody else speak into that. Or if I can't even recognize it, then she'll be like, yeah, your thoughts are not good right now. You need to fix that.
Yeah, that accountability, growth cannot occur in isolation.
Right.
And so having people that you trust that can help you challenge those lies that can occur so frequently. And some of you may not feel comfortable doing that. And so a lot of times what we do to help raise awareness, we have people write their thoughts down.
Yes. And it's the same thing as saying them out loud to yourself too. Being able to see them written down can also bring that same level of awareness and help you fix them. And
what we found is if I put them down on paper, it gives me some level of control and saying that they aren't true.
Yeah.
And what evidence do you have? We can talk about Albert Ellis's model probably one day about ABC and those thoughts that govern us. A lot of the times what we do is like, well, what evidence do you have?
Right.
And back to your situation, if you had a teammate who was struggling at the net, you would not say, hey, you aren't any good, you suck, you're letting the team down, you don't have what it takes. And
right.
That's back to that piece. I love that you have somebody you can call and challenge those thoughts and say, what do I know to be true?
Yeah.
Now, I think it is important, and seems to be an appropriate place to talk about it. Tom Kite, the golfer, said positive thoughts don't guarantee positive results.
Yeah, it's It's more of a process thing.
But negative thoughts guarantee negative results.
Right.
Just because I want to be positive, I'm not a big prosperity gospel thing that I can speak things into existence, that I can make things happen. If I just put enough stuff out there in the universe, good stuff is going to, like there's no evidence to really support that.
Right. But it keeps you open.
It opens you up, and it doesn't set limits on what you can become. We often set limits on ourselves by how we think.
Right.
But Tom Kite came back and said, well, negative thoughts guarantee negative results. And so kind of what are the reasons, what are the thoughts that you have in your mind that work for you? What are the thoughts you have in your mind that work against you? And how do you paint a picture of who you want to be instead of who you don't want to be? You know, the example I can use, my daughter McKee, we just did a podcast. I think we talked about this in her podcast. She was going off to Clemson. She's having a great time. Has not talked a lot about school yet, but I know she's working hard. But she was having to go through Rush. Really nervous about Rush. And it's really stressful.
It is. Yeah.
That you're being judged probably superficially, people that don't know you, and there's tons of pressure to look the part and act the part. And so as she and I went to coffee and broke down, hey, what can we control? What can we not control? My question was her to me, Key, was, hey, how do you want to show up in these conversations? How do you want to show up at these, I don't know if they're rush parties, I don't know what they're called. How do you want to show up? And so I had her list out the 5 words, in this instance, 5 thoughts that she had about herself, of who she wanted to be instead of who she didn't want to be. And I think she said, Dad, I want to be passionate. I want to be curious. I want to be authentic. I want to be genuine. I want to be joyful. And so I made her write those words down and print them in her heart and print them in her mind. And so that's who showed up in those meetings.
Right.
And so when I was able to call her after these meetings, I'm like, McKee, I'm going to ask you, how did you show up? Are you proud of how you showed up? It's not, hey, what they thought of you, or are they going to give you a bid, or do they love you? It's like, were you proud of how you showed up? Consistent with who you wanted to be.
Right.
And that's one way to really overcome those negative thoughts, to overcome natural tendency to be negative, is write down, and I would encourage you listeners to do this, the 5 words or 10 words, or Drew probably likes 3 words, that you really want to have that describe you at your best. Look for evidence to support those thoughts.
Yeah, and I'd encourage people to write the evidence down too, because on the days when it's tough and you don't feel like you are those things, being able to flip back and read that is really helpful, and just kind of breaking some of those lies and negative thoughts down. And
back to that process, McKee did not say, they're all going to love me, and they're all going to give me a bid, and I'm going to get the sorority that I want, and it's going to be the greatest thing ever. Like, that's a false sense of self-talk. But the things she wrote down are things that she can be. She can be authentic. She can be genuine. She can be curious. She can be interested. She can be passionate. Those are things we can control.
Yes.
And so that's one way to do that. So we probably need to kind of wrap up this conversation. A lot to come at you in terms of self-talk. What we hope you're able to become aware of, what is self-talk? What are the situations, events, people that you think in a positive way about yourself or about them? You know, I guess the other piece we didn't talk about is as you think about others, so they are to you.
Yeah.
So we got some more work. There's some more meat on the bone here.
Self-talk's a big one. We can do a lot of podcasts on self-talk.
So kind of your awareness. What are those situations, events? What is self-talk? Understanding how your brain is wired, how it's created to protect you from threats. Understanding the types of self-talk, the positive, negative, and neutral, and maybe 1 or 2 ways you can become aware of your self-talk and change the way you think, which can change the way you live. So what are your final thoughts? Any other thoughts or questions, Marlee?
Yeah, I just think, like you said, the big takeaway is, recognizing that it's normal to have a lot of negative thoughts, but we have the choice to change our beliefs, to change our thoughts, and that can in turn change our actions and who we are, how we perform, who we become, which I think is a really encouraging thing. Yeah,
so much encouragement. William James, America's first psychologist, said it this way: the greatest discovery of my generation is that an individual can alter their life by altering the attitudes of their mind.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this. I hope it encouraged you. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. Please give us a thumbs up. I think that's the right terminology for what we're going to do. And I look forward to hearing how this impacted your life. So again, until next time, continue to be better and pursue better.